So I know I did a video about it's not really good to indulge in nostalgia and how it's kind of like a drug and it can make you kind of depressed about the present. But not a lot of people saw that video. So today what I'm going to do is actually do the opposite of what I said in that video. And we're going to fucking get into nostalgia, specifically the aesthetics of not just my childhood, but like other people in my age group, which would be like 25 to 35-year-olds. But if you're younger, you probably recognize a lot of this anyway. I'm very, very interested in what's called consumer aesthetics. And basically what that is how stores are decorated, how promos are, like all the graphic designs in ads, what styles were being promoted at the time, and overall what gives a time period its look. Because not a lot of people are aware, but we don't really choose, or at the time we didn't. Now we do. But at the time, we didn't choose how everyone looked. And by that, I mean the fashion at the time and how graphic design, like what kind of graphic design was popular. All of that is kind of decided behind closed doors. And mainly how it is decided is that they look back and see what was popular before. And then they try to put a new spin on it. And that's why you get like a cyclical type of zeitgeist, I guess for lack of a better term. Each decade, each time period, there's periods within decades that have different aesthetic choices too. And what I'm not going to talk about is the big three of aesthetics that everyone knows. I'm not going to be really talking about Frutiger Arrow or Frutiger Arrow, however you want to say it. I'm not going to talk about Global Village Coffee House, which has been done to death. Well, I think Frutiger Arrow has probably beat it, but when people started noticing consumer aesthetics, the big one at first was Global Village Coffee House because it's so recognizable. It's so, like, it's very Picasso. When you see it, you know what it is. And I'm not going to talk about Whimsy Goth because Whimsy Goth is just, it's really cool. Don't get me wrong. I really like the way it looks, but it's also a meme. People love talking about Whimsy Goth. I've heard normies talking about how much they want a Whimsy Goth outfit or Whimsy Goth decor. And honestly, that shit is hard to find. So I don't know how like you would do that, but those are the big three. I'm not really going to talk about those. I might touch upon them, but I think they've been done to death. There's plenty of videos that you can go see. And I'm mainly going to talk more about like other stuff that's kind of not, it kind of doesn't get the attention it deserves. So I'm going to start out by talking about wacky pomo, and that's pomo is short for postmodernism. And in order to kind of talk about it, you need to explain what modernism is, because postmodernism is a reaction to modernism, and modernism itself was a reaction to Victorian era aesthetics. So modernism was, I don't know if it was started by this guy, but he was a very big name when it came to modernism. He is like the top dude. His name is Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. I think I'm saying that right. And so basically what he was trying to do in like the early 20th century is he was like, we need to get rid of Victorian aesthetics and Edwardian aesthetics. So everyone knows what Victorian is. It's basically like, it looks like church. Like if you go to a cathedral, that's Victorian. If you think about like the 1800s with like the Jack the Ripper era, that's Victorian. Sherlock Holmes, Victorian. It's called Victorian because it was during the time of Queen Victoria. So after the Victorian era, you get into the 20th century, and then you have the Edwardian era. And I believe that is named after King Edward, and it's kind of a continuation of Victorian era, but it's kind of also its own thing, but it's very much related to Victorian era. It's just kind of like a 1920s, 1910s look with like Victorian flavor. So it's just kind of this combination of two different eras. It's a transitional thing, I guess you could say. And then so what Mies van der Rohe is trying to do, he's like, we need to stop with this shit. We need to bring stuff into the modern era. And the way he did that is by making everything very symmetrical and right angles and thin. And the idea was basically Victorian aesthetics are very ornate. They're very ornamental. There's a lot of shit on there that doesn't need to be there. It's a waste of material. He kind of invented minimalism. Not really, but you can't really invent minimalism. It's like, but for America, he is like one of the first like minimalist designers. And the way that expressed itself was the idea that everything needed to have a reason to be there. So he said, enough with the ornamentation. Whatever is going to be in this, let's say an office space, it needs to have a purpose. We don't want anything extra. And it lent to like a sleek look that is associated with like the 30s to like the 50s. And not a lot of people are aware of that there was a conscious effort to get rid of the Victorian era style, and stuff that your grandparents were on was considered like the future, the present. So that's modernism. Postmodernism was started by this group called the Memphis Group. Who is the Memphis Group? They were Italian designers led by this guy named Ettore Sottsass. I'm probably not saying that right, but that's his name. I have it on the screen for you to see. And this guy was very much a forward thinker, even in the past where they were trying to do modernism and that was the future. According to them, he was like, no, this shit sucks. There's no soul to it. We're getting rid of human expression inside of offices and it's very soulless. And it's very much how I feel about minimalism today. A lot of people love minimalism and I think it has its uses, especially in like the corporate setting. But when you spread minimalism around to like living spaces, I think that kind of sucks. But so Sottsass was like, I'm gonna do something crazy. I'm gonna start making furniture that looks weird as fuck, but it's gonna have a purpose. And the purpose is nothing needs to have a purpose, which is also which is also the opposite idea to modernism, where it was like everything needs to have a purpose. He is saying the opposite. He's saying we're gonna make weird shit for no reason, and that's punk rock of in like the designer space. We're gonna make shit that we think looks cool. And so now you have this aesthetic of clashing colors, weird shapes, squiggles. There's a pattern in it called the bacteria, because it looks like bacteria, and it doesn't have to make sense, but it does have to kind of come together cohesively. And so they were able to do that. They were able to pull off this weird aesthetic that no one's ever seen before. It's almost psychedelic. And this is the Memphis Group. They were called the Memphis Group because they kept listening to Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues Again by Bob Dylan. So a lot of people don't know how influential Bob Dylan is, but he's extremely influential if you lived in the last century. So this keeps going on for quite some time, and it peaks in the 80s. And the way that expressed itself into the culture is the big neon shapes, the carpet with like squiggly lines and stars and spirals. And this is like peak 80s. Peak 80s is postmodern for the most part in the mainstream. And at the time, it still held on to this idea of we're doing this for a reason. We're rejecting the uptight corporate style of the previous generation and we're throwing that into the garbage. Well, what happens in the 90s, like every other thing, and this is where Wacky Pomo comes in, because this is essentially, and I was very sad to realize this. It kind of burst the bubble of like me looking back and thinking, oh wow, this was a magical time. It actually It actually was a sign of how commodified postmodernism had become, because in the 90s, you start getting these crazy interior designs that are very much associated with the 90s. Things like children's television shows, like especially the live action ones. Everything was postmodern and wacky. And what separates Wacky Pomo from regular postmodernism is that Wacky Pomo is postmodernism on steroids. And it's just magnified the weirdness of it to such a degree that it doesn't make any sense anymore. And there are corporate interiors they have like gears in them. Everything's a different color. Everything's giving play school, but it's youthful. It's youthful energy, which is really cool. I really like that because I was a youth in the 90s. I was very small. And so when I look back, the aesthetics of the time actually match my experience of what I remember. And there are still many, I guess you could say, like fossils of that idea. For instance, like the play places that Burger King and McDonald's have. That's very, very postmodern. Children's activity centers and playgrounds, all of that is very postmodern, because and specifically Wacky Pomo. And that's simply because for the first time, it really captured the imagination of children and made it visible and created an environment to exist within. But then it got commodified in the 90s. So how did it get commodified? like I said earlier, you see it everywhere. And specifically, you see this a lot with Nickelodeon at the time, because Nickelodeon was very, very wacky pomo. Like the slime, the oranges, the neons, even the cartoons, like the, how do you say it? Klasky Skupo, or I'm like bastardizing every foreign name in this video, but those kind of cartoons were very wacky pomo. And it's wackiness for wackiness sake. And there's no philosophy to it anymore. And it just means youth, energy. It just means that. And it went corporate and it got oversaturated. And that's why you don't see it anymore. The 90s were very awesome to be a kid in my opinion, because the mainstream cultural dominant energy was very youth focused. So after that time, it kind of bled into the 2000s a little bit. But by the time you get to 2010, everyone's already moving on to minimalism. They're packing their bags and they're saying, we're done with postmodernism. It was cool for a time, but it's old now. And that's kind of sad to me. I really hope in the future we kind of see a resurgence for that, because right now kids do not have like their own environment. Their environment is like in a tablet. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I haven't seen Toy Story 5 to tell me how to feel about that. So, and I don't have kids, so I really don't know if it's a good or bad thing. Maybe it all comes down to like what you let your kids use on the tablet, which makes a lot of sense. But there should be like more physical environments for parents and their kids to have fun in, and not just have like a playground. Like I saw a picture that they got rid of play places in this particular McDonald's, and what got gutted out, there is now just a giant room with kind of like a touchscreen thing on the wall in the corner with like one chair. And it was like the saddest thing you could ever see when it comes to stuff for children. And yeah, now it's just like, I don't even know if doctors' offices still do the wacky pomo thing. So the modern inheritor, in my opinion, of wacky pomo is called dopamine decor, and I'll put some photos of that up right now. And it's kind of like a modern take on wacky pomo. It's more like 80s sensibilities, but made modern. And I think it looks really cool. If I had an apartment of my own, I would love to just decorate it in dopamine decor. And I don't know if dopamine decor is just a meme. You know, I don't know if people are really, if this is a real movement or just some kind of idea someone had. But I think it's a really neat way to come back to wacky pomo and the 90s. And yeah, maybe a lot of that is me coloring the time with my own brush of experience, because I was a little kid. I don't know what the 90s were like. I don't know what the adults were thinking at the time. I know a lot of movies are like, and it's kind of a meme to be like, oh, I have a well-paying job in a cubicle and my life sucks. I have my own apartment. This sucks. So if there's one thing we learn, is that humans are never happy and we always need to like change it up. So let's move on to McTuscan. What is McTuscan? Because it sounds like McDonald's. And yeah, that's kind of the idea. McTuscan is associated with McMansions. And if you don't know what a McMansion is, there is a website called McMansion Hell. And it's basically these big houses that are almost mansions, but not really. They're just kind of like big, and they have roofs that don't make sense. Like their architecture is hideous if you know anything about architecture. So McTuscan is the interior design that's usually associated with these McMansions. And an example of that would be, if you've ever seen The Sopranos, the inside of Tony Soprano's house is very McTuscan, and we will get into that. But first, we kind of have to look at a preceding aesthetic to this, so we can see how we got to the McTuscan idea. So in the 80s, there was this thing called soft countryana, and that's not the technical term. I forgot to mention that all of this whole video is based a lot on the research of Evan Collins and the broader Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute. I couldn't have made this video without them, so please like visit the website and the arena page, and if you can support them, that would be awesome. They source a lot of these visuals from magazines, and it costs money to, I'm sure they like have their own jobs and stuff, but it's good for them to have an incentive to keep doing this with support and stuff like that. But anyway, so this is the description of soft countryana. Seems like this 1970s to early 90s style was possibly an influence on the much later cottagecore style in the 2020s. Some names to research: Auntie M Collection, Treasurecraft USA, Alma Lynn, Gun Sachs, Laura Ashley, Homecore Home Interiors, Paula Vaughn. These are this is me speaking. These are the brands of like the 80s that pushed forward this aesthetic and they sold it to people. Evan goes on to say, cultural context wise, maybe this has something to do with a conservative turn in the early mid 1980s, though it technically emerged in the late 1970s with a prairie look. The rise of the religious right, quote, morning in America, Reagan, the continued white flight and suburbanization at the time, boomers aging and settling down with families, the influence of the gay 90s revival, and if you don't know what gay 90s is, it doesn't have anything to do with homosexuality. It's the 1890s. There was a revival of that. And I'm not sure if it was in the 70s or the 80s, but for some reason, they brought back the 1890s, which was called the gay 90s, and those aesthetics and that kind of art was very popular. And you can kind of see this in the Cheers TV show, but that's a big tangent right now. So let's continue. In general, Edwardian and Victoriana revival at the time. Also, there is possibly some aspect of the rise of historic preservation, with Victorian architecture being a big part of that. Victorian homes were sort of considered the McMansions of their era. After the Great Depression occurred, it made those opulent, exuberant, and intricate homes look ridiculous, so they fell into disrepair, but in the late 1960s onward became a focus of preservationists. I'll add that the main impetus to actually delve into this aesthetic was an article on the Country SF store. They mentioned that this style/look/aesthetic was the most lucrative in consumer history. Like, it was apparently bigger in the 1980s than I think our collective memory acknowledges. Originally titled 1980s Country Victorian Folk Americana Style, new name is a portmanteau of soft plus country plus Victorian and Edwardian plus Americana. Alternative name, Country Victorian Romanticism, Edwardian Romanticism, Romantic Countryana. So that's the description of soft countryana, and basically, if you want to understand exactly what it is, you can look at any John Hughes movie, and in those movies, all of the houses are that aesthetic, because in the 80s, that was the aesthetic of every upper middle class home. Home Alone is also, I think, soft countryana in a sense. The idea behind this is the people who were shopping out and shilling this aesthetic sensed that people were feeling like they couldn't connect with their roots. And so a lot of it is related to rich, affluent looks from the previous century. And these are cultural memories that stick around and they become aspirations, such as the plantation house and the giant, those kind of colonist houses. I don't know how you would describe them, but like in the New England area where people first settled, those kind of houses, that's what people were trying to get back to. And if you hear like, why did people want to live on plantations, and you think that when you hear plantations, it's very much separated from the cultural context of a plantation. It's very much like romanticized, which simply means all the bad stuff, we don't think about that, and all the good stuff we think about. That's romanticization. So how does this relate to McTuscan? McTuscan is kind of the same idea. People are trying to grasp at something that they have in their cultural memory, and it's not necessarily real. It's like an idea. It's like when your grandfather told you, oh yes, back in my day, we had these grand houses that we used to live in, or our family came from this part of the country where everyone had a huge house because everything was so good. And it's that kind of idea. So McTuscan is kind of like that, but instead of looking towards like the UK and living not where the peasants live, but where the landed gentry live, which is the lord or lady of the area. That's the UK version of soft countryana. The American version would be, and this is mainly for, I don't know if I would say minorities, because it was spread out through all races of America, but it mainly focused on the Mediterranean ideal, the Mediterranean affluency. And by that, I mean, it's like Italian, coastal, big house, giant arches, pillars, lots of browns, lots of dark greens, very lush, that kind of look. So the description, Evan Collins writes, is search terms / styles that seem to be associated with this look, quote unquote, old world, Tuscan, Mediterranean, luxury, European, Andalusian, French Norman, French country. It seems to be a melange of various European styles, filtered through a neo-eclectic 2000s home builder mentality and general 90s through 2000s trend of very warm earth tones and beige. Has had a bit of a meme revival with posts referencing the 2000s Tuscan kitchen style. Possible names: McClectic, Tuscan Light / Lux, McTuscan, Old World Lux, Eurobane (parentheses proposed by Jerry Chi on the Kari Discord) as a portmanteau of European and urbane. It appears to have emerged earlier than I thought, evolving out of other styles (parentheses like French country) sometime in the mid-90s, but peaking right around the time of the onset of the Great Recession, around 2007 to 2008, then vanishing rather quickly thereafter. This also ties into the late 90s to 2000s American obsession with building those old European village lifestyle town centers all over the place. There's an interesting aspirational aspect to this related to that notion that Americans desire communal, vibrant, walkable places like those in Europe, but only end up getting little isolated themed Disney World-esque shopping centers all over the place. This style is connected to another one I've been looking into, the neo-traditional new urbanism wave occurring contemporaneously. Prominent designers / builders I've noticed: Seder Design Collection Inc., Paralici. Most of the images here are scans from various home design magazines and books from the late 90s to the mid 2000s. So that's very true that if you also want to know what this style is, if you go to any plaza in like the affluent area in your town or city, there should still be very much a plaza somewhere that just has, it's like bleeding this Mediterranean, Italian style architecture and stuff like fountains and pots that look a certain way. Everything's beige. And so this is very, to me, it reminds me a lot of going to a friend. My house was not by the way, my house was not decorated like this. We have and still have a mobile home that's just like a 90s mobile home. But when I went to a friend's house who actually had like a nice house or a just house in general, they would decorate it in this style. It was decorated as the McTuscan style. And when I look at stuff like that, it reminds me of a time, but it also feels instinctually to me aspirational. Like when you're rich, your house looks like this. And it's really funny because this whole look is just kind of like a corporate psyop to get people associating these Mediterranean cultural aesthetics to affluence. And, oh, your house is just going to be like a coastal Italian little village type thing that it's been in your family for like generations, this kind of house. And like, it's not made out of stone. These houses are not made out of stone. They're fucking drywall, and it's like cheap plaster being molded into something that looks rich and really like middle class. Middle class isn't poor, but middle class is not rich either. It's middle. It's mid. It's everyone, or at least at the time when there was a middle class. I feel like there's hardly one now. Like I feel like, in my opinion, everyone's struggling right now. But in the 90s, when people were doing well, there was a middle class, and the middle class look was this idea, this weird mass-produced thing that was meant to be authentic. And it's the same thing with Countryana too. Like Countryana wants to feel authentic. It wants to feel like there's roots there, cultural roots. And it's not. It's a fiction created by a company somewhere. I don't know where, but in some boardroom, they were just like, why don't we just fucking make everything Victorian? Why don't we just make everything Mediterranean? And that's really hilarious. And I don't even think people were like even thinking of that idea. They were just like, this is what houses look like. This is what everyone's buying. These are the decorations that are being sold. And a lot of the time, that's why I said earlier that we don't choose the look of a decade. It gets chosen because it's a illusion of choice. Because if everything in the store is like soft Countryana decorations and you're in the 80s and you feel like you're choosing something, but you're really not, because all of the options are the same consumer aesthetic. And this went on for a really long time. And the thing that broke it down is the internet and eBay and Amazon, because now you can buy whatever you wanted. It didn't necessarily have to be from a brick and mortar store where they're trying to figure out what the aesthetic of the time is, what's hot right now. Because now with the internet, it's like you can buy whatever you want. You can have whatever you want, whatever you think looks good. So that's another reason we're not seeing a big movement now. Everything's just pick and choose. And I have a video about how the monoculture just doesn't exist anymore. And it's kind of a good thing, but it's kind of a bad thing because now we just don't have an identity for the time. And again, maybe that's just like memory doing tricks on you, because it's starting to feel like I felt like this in the 2010s, that, oh, we don't have a 2010s look. But if you look back, there definitely was a 2010s look. But anyway, yeah, that's McTuscan. It's fake. It's a fucking fake thing. I don't know how else to put it. It's a weird, but there's something real in there, in my opinion, because when you walk into a McTuscan home, it feels like a home. Like all the colors are nice and warm and inviting. And when I see McTuscan, I think of, wow, like this is a family environment. This is where a family lives. But it does also give a little bit of like, yeah, I bet they have nice food. I bet the kids have a big room. But anyway, so let's move on to another consumer aesthetic. And this one is like it's almost not anything. I just included it because I really like the style of it. I think it looks cool and it appeals to my Eastern philosophy ideas that I like so much. And this is called Zen X. And here's the description. Popular with Gen X and some baby boomers, this aesthetic emerged in the early 1990s, part of the natural organic shift away from the 1980s excess and a resurgent wave of environmentalism. Examples given: Sting in the rainforest, the corporate eco-responsibility trend made famous by companies like The Body Shop, The Nature Company, etc. This was combined with a trend towards minimalism and renewed interest in Japanese architecture and design concepts. Zen Buddhism, yoga, Zen gardens, bamboo. Very prevalent style for body care and tea shops, spas, and some restaurants and high-end gyms. So this thing is obviously inspired by Zen Japanese ideals. And this one's interesting because it's not about the look, really. It's not, this looks beautiful. And even though I think it does, it's more about the psychological effect that it has on you. And that's why it's called Zen X, because it feels Zen. That's what it's trying to mimic. And it's doing it in a way that does not at all respect the culture it's drawing from, which doesn't make a difference to me. I don't really care. I think, like, not to get woke on you, but like I think that happens a lot, and I think it's a very American thing to do. But at the same time, doing that kind of is like a little bit respectful, in my opinion, if you're not doing it in a way that you're making fun of it or you're making it out to be like it's from a primitive culture. I think it actually shows that there is an understanding that different cultural aesthetics have certain ideas attached to them that are separate from the actual culture itself. And so what I'm trying to say is, like, this stuff is obviously not really Zen. It's not really, like Buddhist stuff. Like, a Buddhist didn't design this fucking tea shop or that supplement store, but it has the actual effect. It has a real calming effect. Like, it calms your nervous system when you walk into this kind of environment, regardless of who designed it. Maybe someone very high at the top understood, the actual Zen philosophy, but I don't know if the actual, like, interior designer for this particular shop understands what Zen is or what Buddhism is, or like why you should seek enlightenment. They're just trying to calm people down when they come into a tea shop. They just want to have that vibe. And I think that's fine. I think that's totally cool. I think there should be spaces like that in consumer areas, in malls. Sometimes I go to the mall and just like go into each store, and not even for like to buy something. I just go into the store because I want to take in the vibe of the store, and I'll walk around in there and I'll look at the things. And, I just really... This is gonna sound weird, but I do have a weird fascination with the shopping mall and like consumerism and all of that. And I'm not really a big consumer because I just don't have the money for it, but I do like going to the mall. And there's a mall in my area that's very fucking huge. And I know that's not very common these days because of online shopping and stuff, but because I live on the border, I live in South Texas, and South Texas is in the news right now because there's apparently a screw worm on the loose here, like killing cows and shit, and I don't know what it's doing. But in South Texas, on the border, we can have a giant mall because we will have people from Mexico, rich people, cross the border to visit, and they will shop at our mall. And that way there is a lot of customers for the mall, and they get something that they cannot get in their country. And yeah, they could order online, but I'm sure there's like fucking taxes and stuff. It probably is better to like just walk over the border and go shop in person. And so yeah, we have a big mall, and I love walking around in it. I feel like a little ant, and I look around and I'm just amazed every time, because I just think like, wow, is this how it felt to to be like a person in ancient Greece, and you're in those big like mausoleums and shit, and you're just like, how did people build this shit? That's how I feel in a mall. I'm like, how did they build this? Because it's so fucking huge, and there's so many people in here, and we're all just walking around like a fucking colony of ants, and it boggles the mind that there's just so many people, and there's enough money to go around to go to these stores and to go to this food court. But I'm getting away with the tangent. We got to move on. This next one is called Gen X Soft Club, and this is one of my favorites. And I don't know why I like it so much. I just really like it. Here's a description. The following description was written by Sloan Angel Hilton, the creator of the Facebook group for this aesthetic. Its rise and fall between the years 1996 and 2002, a movement in pop culture that is spawned from the research of the Y2K Aesthetic Institute. A notable shift in the visual mood of pop culture happened during the turn of the millennium, but it wasn't Y2K aesthetic. One thing I have found is that it was in vogue to be between 25 and 35, the prime age of Gen X at this time. I think of the music first era of VH1 programming. Contrary to contemporaneous Y2K aesthetic and also McBling style of the early 2000s, Gen X, Y/AC models in editorial fashion or artist marketing were much more, quote, natural. You will see tons of nude lipstick, hair parted down the middle, or natural textured hair, natural leathers, knee-high boots, duster jackets, natural and muted colors, especially greens, beiges, tans, grays, and black. Design and fashion was moving from 60s revival into early 70s. Retrofuturism was Y2K aesthetic, but Gen X, YAC, was more terrestrial. Its futurism was a mix of sterile and organic. McBling was a full-blown disco revival, but here we just see hints of the 70s. Depictions of city life through a colonialist lens. First wave gentrification. Urban life influenced graphic design, such as in the use of Helvetica as inspired by the New York City subway signs. The rise of a minimalist design revival. On the runway, the rise/peak of the modern supermodel Naomi Campbell, Kate Moss, and Linda Evangelista, who were all peaking at 25. In photography and film, prevalence of bleach bypass, cross-processing, quote, Lomo effect, and other color grading trends. Hit music in the US was heavily influenced or even imported from the UK and Europe. Notably, we saw a surge in French house/disco, big beat, electronic, trance, UK garage, and easy listening/adult contemporary marketed for Generation X, less pure moods and more Café Del Mar. Pop artists were reinvented to fit, like Madonna, parentheses ray of light. Soft club refers to club culture trickling down into mainstream culture. As the style shifts into McBling, club culture becomes so huge that only the rich can enjoy it in Ibiza. R&B plus hip-hop had a marked shift in production due to producers like Soul Shock and Carlin, trackmasters, Darkchild/Rodney Jenkins, in addition to many more who formed top of the millennium sounds working with both these genres. Pop music was equally transformed by club music, R&B, and Latin pop. Rock, pop, and poetry were put over trip-hop/hip-hop and breakbeats. Songs that may not have been written for the dance floor were produced as club music. See Soft Club. Gen X young adults were into entrepreneurship, which supposedly fueled the 90s economic recovery, especially via tech industry. This is why they have been considered a generation which, quote, sold out. Discussion is much deserved regarding the nature of media diversity, both genuine, parentheses largely people of color in leading production roles across mediums, museums, and as a marketing tool, and the start of gentrification as it would come to be known in post-industrial cities. So what this aesthetic is it's very recognizable. If you see it, you know what you're looking at. There's a lot of cool colors, and I don't mean cool like, oh, it's so cool. I mean cool as like temperature cool. A lot of blues, a lot of dark reds, a lot of beige, but that like really cool, like frosty looking blue is just, that's what this is about. If you look at the cover of OK Computer, that is the look. And I don't know why I like this look so much. It's just so sleek. It's so cool. Like, it's so awesome. And it's futuristic. And when I look at it, I think of the 90s electronic music. And I do think of Madonna, like Ray of Light era, you know? And you like, for whatever reason, I don't know why, it reminds me a lot of like the PS3, because I feel like the PS3 had a lot of this philosophy in it. And one of the big games that used this a lot was actually the first Assassin's Creed games, like the Desmond games. And so when you would be in the Abstergo parts of the game where you were out of the Animus and you were walking around, everything was very Gen X Soft Club aesthetic, because this aesthetic felt like the future. But it wasn't like a silly, over-exaggerated style of future like the Y2K stuff. It wasn't like that. Y2K futurism is science fiction. It's like, I don't know, it's it just feels almost fantastical. And that's not to say it's bad. I really love Y2K futurism. But Gen X Soft Club is something different. It's like a realistic, it's a little gritty, not that gritty, but like there's a little bit of grit to it, and it feels like the future. It feels like a cold industrial style future where everything's run by computers and everything, like where humans just trying to like find warmth somewhere in this cold environment. And I don't know why I like it so much. It could just be the nostalgia talking, I'll admit it. But I think it's more than that. I think it's just so stylish. And I'm not the only one that thinks so, because there's also this in the modern era, and you could call that Gen X, or it's Gen Z. Yeah, it's Gen Z Soft Club. And they're kind of bringing that back. Because Gen Z, funnily enough, has nostalgia for things that they were born around the time for, but didn't really experience. So they just kind of see things as they were, not with all the cultural context associated with it. But yeah, Gen X Soft Club is one of the more special ones, in my opinion, because it just feels so associated with the generation of PlayStation 3 of my childhood and like those games. And I don't know. I also want to talk about how like this aesthetic specifically is very city focused, and I'm not a big I've never lived in a big city. I visited big cities, and it does give you that feeling of a big city where it's just so, in the wintertime it's very cold, it's very isolating, and you're surrounded by like concrete, and you're surrounded by glass, and like there's these little warm pockets of, you know, maybe you go inside a store or something, or you talk to someone in public and you just have a little conversation, and like that's where the warmth comes from. And it's a version of industrial. To me it is. It's like a futuristic version of industrial where it's like it's not hostile. I think that's why I like it. It's not hostile like other industrial aesthetics. It doesn't care. It's apathetic. I think that's the best way to put it. It's like the world doesn't care. So you actually yourself have to go out and find that human connection. But anyway, if I try to like make my thoughts concise on this subject, we'll be here another hour. So let's move on. This is going to be one of the more brief ones because I don't really have a lot to say about it, but I just find it notable. And it's something that people don't really talk about probably because there's not a lot there, but it is notable to me. And this aesthetic is called Vector Heart. And I think it looks fucking cool. Here's a description. Period of relevance, late 1990s to late 2000s. Prevalent motifs, angular, maximalist 2D vector shapes with high contrast colors set against neutral backgrounds, blocky futuristic type, utilitarian product design, and industrial urban settings inspired by Swiss modernism and pioneered by firms like Bionic Systems and the Designers Republic. Featured heavily in game UIs of the era like Wipeout, Ace Combat 3, and Metal Gear Solid 2. Closely associated with hip-hop and rave music of the early 2000s like IDM, breakbeat, and drum and bass. So yeah, there's not much to say about this. except that I saw it a lot in video games. I heavily associate it with video games, and that's not a bad thing because video games are fucking cool. Even as a grown-ass man, I still really like video games. And this aesthetic actually does remind me a lot of Metal Gear Solid, specifically Peace Walker, because the whole UI was pretty much this. And I also remember seeing the ads in like gaming magazines for like the Wipeout games and thinking, holy shit, that looks awesome. That looks insane. And it was 100% due to this aesthetic. And this is Vector Heart. And I don't know if it was Game Informer or PlayStation Magazine that had Vector Heart as their like primary aesthetic for their magazine. And for the longest time, like this, like you would turn the page and just the way the word for this is escaping my brain, but it's the way the pages were designed. The words would go here, the paragraphs were like this, they were in columns, and there were little flourishes, and all of that was Vector Heart. And I'll put photos up just so you can see what I'm talking about, because I'm not doing a very good job of explaining. But yeah, Vector Heart is not exactly my childhood, but my later childhood, but like I guess you could say my preteen era. That is Vector Heart, and it's very of like that time. It's not PS3, it's more PS2, it's more Game Boy Advance SP, that era where like things weren't edgy anymore, things were kind of stopped. They stopped doing the whoa, like so extreme, dude. Like it wasn't that era anymore. We were moving on into like we're more mature and we're not edgy anymore. We're not, older brother core. We're mature, but we're still cool in a way that's almost edgy but not quite. So that's what that reminds me of. And it's funny because I feel like my life has followed the trajectory of these consumer aesthetics, because when I was really little, Wacky Pomo was big. When I was older, the things were still, a little postmodern. We were getting more into like edgy stuff, X Games, violence, video games, snark, sarcasm, and then there was the Vector Heart type stuff that was the bridging period from edginess to what would come later on. And it's just I just feel like, is it just me, or is it like younger generations, maybe they associate this with their childhood? I don't know, but to me this is a very like teenager type look. It's not really for little kids, but let's move on to corporate grunge / horror grunge. And these don't have a lot of a description. Corporate grunge, the ubiquitous corporate grunge look derived from the hype surrounding the Pacific Northwest grunge music scene. The work of graphic designers such as David Carson, Neville Brody, and Carlos Segura, and magazines like Raygun and Immigrant. I don't know how to say that. And here's a horror grunge description. Corporate grunge, graphic design, typography, and Photoshop grungy aesthetics combined with various horror motifs and color schemes. Very popular in media, especially movies and video games, the mid 1990s and early 2000s. So I love corporate grunge. I love horror grunge. I think, again, it just reminds me of like growing up and getting these games that were not for me. They were like, this was my first coming into contact with like the adult world, and it was like scary. When I was little, I was not allowed to watch horror movies, and I just thought like, why do they make these movies? Like, why like these movies are evil? And no one told me like don't watch them because they're evil. It was just more like they're not for you, they're for adults. And I would just be like, oh fuck. And it's a weird feeling to be scared of a type of media, because it's not like watching a horror movie now where I want to go see this movie because it's going to scare the shit out of me and it's going to be fun and it's going to be a good movie. And when you're little and you think of a horror movie, at least when you're me, I was like, oh fuck, this is terrifying. It was almost like Lovecraftian fear. If I saw this, I would never sleep again. It would rearrange my DNA. It would change who I am as a person. Like, it was existential. Horror movies were existential to me, and I think it's just because my parents wouldn't let me see them, so my mind had to fill in the gap of what a horror movie was. And to me, it was just like the scariest thing a person could possibly see. And that's not what it was at all. And I remember thinking as a little kid, I would have my friends tell me about the Friday the 13th movies and Freddy, you know, and the Nightmare on Elm Street and all the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I was just like, holy shit, how are they watching this? This is insane. And what's funny is that Freddy and Jason are humorous. They're like campy. They're campy. And that tone does not translate through a little kid, because a little kid cannot recognize when something's campy. Maybe they recognize it on like their nervous system understands that it's all kind of a joke. But when they're telling the story of the movie to like another kid, that aspect of the movie does not get translated. So you're just like, you're hearing, oh yeah, he ripped a guy's head off and he cut a guy in half and he stabbed a girl while she was showering. And in my mind, it was, oh my God, like just in my head is like running a snuff film in my imagination. And really it's not that. It's just kind of like a thrill. It's a little thrill for you to see in the movie theater. But yeah, this was corporate grunge and horror grunge were my closest analogs to watching some kind of horror movie. You know, it was the closest I would come to coming into contact with those aesthetics and ideas. And I thought it was really cool. I still think industrial is really awesome too, just as an aesthetic to draw inspiration from. And it also has a lot of meaning to it, because in the 20th century, like towards the end, like in the 80s, there was a lot of industrial aesthetics and stuff. And you can see this in movies like RoboCop, and Nine Inch Nails was very industrial influenced. Even industrial music, that's where it comes from. So it was about corporate power becoming more obvious and companies were taking over. You know, there was a sense of that. And I think making the factory itself scary is kind of like a cultural subconscious response to what was going on economically, in my opinion. And industrial rustiness and all that Silent Hill stuff, it's perfect. It's so perfect for horror, because what could be more scary than an abandoned factory where you can't see the end of it and everything just looks decayed and sharp and it could cut you when you walk by. But yeah, so that's corporate grunge. You also saw this a lot in Hot Topic too, especially in the 90s. And I don't remember too much of it, but there were still essences of it left around in the early 2000s. So I kind of do have a somewhat of a memory, because the cultural imprint was still there. And I remember, I don't know if this was a nationwide chain, but when you were little, specifically if you were a millennial and you were little, you would rent out movies. And this was before Netflix came along. So you would go to a store, a video rental store, and it worked basically like a library. And you would go there maybe on Friday or whenever your parents could take you. You pick out a movie and you borrow it for a week, and you have that movie. You can rewatch it, because that's something you did back then, because there were not a lot of options when you're in the 2000s, like pre-internet. There were not a lot of options of things to see. So you would rent a few movies and watch them over and over until you got tired of them, and then you would take it back. But there was also the video game section, and like I said, I don't know if this was a national chain. I know Blockbuster was, but I would go to Hollywood Video, and they had a section of the store called Game Crazy, and this section of the store was separated by a chain link fence. So it was very corporate grunge, and you would pass through the fence. It wasn't like closed or anything. It was only closed when the store was closed, but you would go inside the Game Crazy section. You would have to pass through a fence, and it was kind of like walking through a torii gate in Japan, where like you feel the energy when you're passing through, and you're in this environment made for gamers, when being a gamer wasn't so cringe. It was just kind of like a niche thing, even though it wasn't that niche. It was honestly like very mainstream at the time, but now it's just all encompassing, a phrase I like to use because it's just so appropriate. Like gaming now is very all encompassing. Back then it was for teenagers and kids, and more males than females, but now everyone games. But yeah, back then corporate grunge was the look a lot of the time for alternative, not just alternative people, but just alternative niches, anything not mainstream, because gaming at the time, even though it was mainstream for kids. It was not mainstream for adults. When I was little, I had never heard of adults playing games. And if they did play games, it was more like, oh yeah, we used to play games. We used to play the fucking Pac-Man at the arcade. Not the same thing. But now like adults, kids, old people, they all play games. So let's move on to the last one I will talk about today. It's called teen punk. And what teen punk is basically everything associated with like emo in the 2000s. And here's the description. Mid to late 2000s, prevalent motifs, pop punk and emo music, skater subculture, distressed graphics resembling graffiti / paint splatter, juxtaposed with sketches resembling high school doodles, bold stencil and ransom note type that evokes tour posters, quote, scene fashion, parentheses, dyed hair, makeup, eyeliner, graphic t-shirts, skinny jeans, skate shoes, themes of teenage rebellion, nonconformity, and authenticity / self-acceptance. Related aesthetics. Evolution of corporate grunge aimed at adolescent millennials / Gen Z in the 2000s. Closely related to the countercultural tone of urbling, adopting graphic cues like graffiti motifs but targeted towards wider audiences, reacts against McBling as a more modest and authentic alternative to the perceived consumer excess of bling fashion. Problematic racial undertones and misogyny were often involved in this dynamic. Sometimes overlaps with super flat pop to make it more colorful and accessible, parentheses, typically via the shared use of vector blooms. So teen punk is the look of MySpace, or at least that's what I think it looked like, because at the time I did not have fucking internet. So even though I was emo, I did not have access to that admittedly large chunk of the culture at the time. And, you know, not everyone had internet back then. I think what a lot of the younger generations don't understand is that not everyone was connected to the internet. It was like 50% of people were connected to the internet in the 2000s. I didn't get my own home internet until like 2015, I think. And that seems insane to think about, but yeah, that's just like how it was. And so teen punk is an aesthetic that I hold very close and dear because it just reminds me of middle school. And again, like I said, these aesthetics are following my growth as a person, weirdly, because they got popular as I myself were the appropriate demographic for these things. And I was gonna do a whole video about like being emo in the 2000s, but I guess I can talk a little bit about it like right now, because it is something that not a lot of people understand, especially the younger generations. And I'm not trying to be like unk here. I'm not trying to be like the younger people don't understand, you know, how it was back in the day. But what's going on now is a weird romanticism of the culture back then. And it's understandable because scene is kind of being looked at again, not just by like Gen Z, but also people my age. They're looking back at their youth. And because we're all entering our 30s, and like the youngest millennials are entering their 30s. So this is kind of the time where you kind of look back and you're just like, wow, a lot of time has passed between my youth and where I'm at now, which is like solidly an adult. I'm still young, technically, in the grand scheme of things, but I am not young in the cultural sense that people associate with young people. But I think that's kind of changing, because not just our lifespans are getting longer, I think we're all gonna live to like 100 or something. And you can say like, no, that's not true. The fucking microplastics are gonna kill us. And I don't think that's true, dude. I think medicine is just getting so good that most of the problems we're having today or we're afraid of are going to be solved by the time we're old. And it'll just pretty much be just a question of like, are you rich enough to sustain yourself, your mortal shell? But yeah, being emo in the 2000s. Emo is a weird thing to me because it wasn't until later that I found out that that's not even what it started as. Emo was kind of like a offshoot of hardcore punk. And it was more, instead of being aggressive, they were like, let's be more in tune with our emotions. Let's be more introspective. Let's talk about how we feel, which was radical for the 80s. And so it was kind of like a small thing. It was a movement, but it wasn't popular by any means. It was more like, if you're in the city and you have an emo scene there, then yeah, that's cool. And like they weren't dressing with like the crazy hair and like the eyeliner and shit like that. Okay, they were dressed like punks because it was punk. And so that continued on until I would say the early 2000s. Or no. Green Day kind of, I wouldn't say they invented pop punk, but like they definitely popularized it. And so did Blink-182. And so out of emo and hardcore and popular music, specifically power pop, all of that came together and formed pop punk. And pop punk into the 2000s with like Blink-182, Sum 41, Green Day, they were creating a mainstream I guess, niche for themselves in the mainstream. So what happens is emo enters the picture again, and so it also brings along hardcore punk, and it brings along metal, and it fuses that with pop punk. And so now you have a mainstream of a sound that takes pop punk but makes it harder, and it makes it heavier, and there's breakdowns. And this is the new rock sound, okay? So there was new metal, and I said in my last nostalgia video that new metal was related, or no, new metal was the last big movement of rock, but that's not quite true, because it was actually the emo mainstream shit, the pop punk stuff that was coming out in the mid 2000s, starting with Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, stuff like that. And that's kind of where I entered into middle school. Okay, so it was very appropriate for me to be a middle schooler in the mid 2000s because alternative was huge. Alternative was mainstream. There was a whole store dedicated to alternative aesthetics called Hot Topic. And so it was a very good time to be a teenager. And because you would hear like Fall Out Boy on the radio, you would hear Panic at the Disco on the radio, My Chemical Romance, the Black Parade album had just come out. So it was what a time to be alive, in my opinion. And the aesthetics of emo were weird because it was kind of like they were taking the glam rock look of the 80s, like the Motley Crue, Poison, Bon Jovi type look, and they were making it for emo, weirdly. So if you want to know where like scene style comes from, it comes from hair metal, and guys kind of had like a mop top kind of thing going on. That's from the Beatles. That's from like mod culture, 60s mod culture. I know there's kind of like a 80s mod American gothic type stuff going on, but I don't know too much about that mod culture. So this era gets romanticized by younger generations, and I'm not saying they shouldn't, but it wasn't everything, because one of my biggest pushbacks on like the romanticization of emo culture in the 2000s is that younger generations don't realize how inconvenient everything was. So these days you have like 50 flavors of Monster, okay? Back then there was no white Monster. We didn't even have the white Monster. We had green and we had blue. And then they came out with the imported one. And that the only difference with the imported one is that it had that really cool looking top that you would twist and you could close it again. So that was one thing that was harder. You couldn't fucking get weed, dude. Like it was hard. You had to find a dealer. You had to have a dealer or have a friend that had a dealer. You know, you couldn't just go to the store and buy it like today. You couldn't go to the smoke shop. Smoke shops only sold bongs. Okay, they only sold bongs and papers. They did not sell weed. And the internet isn't what it was today. Social media was very slow. It was something you logged into one time a day and that was it. You weren't on there all day because there was no point. It wasn't like if you updated your Facebook or whatever, like, yeah, you would have like a little feed, but people would just kind of like post a status like one time a day or like a few times a day. It wasn't like today where you're just like on it whenever you have free time and you're like there's a constant news feed of things being fed to you. Like there wasn't an algorithm. It was just your friends and you making content for each other, and it wasn't even called content. It was just like you were shitting your thoughts onto the internet for other people to see, and that was it. You were posting photos. So the social media aspect wasn't there either. And from what I understand about MySpace, it was just kind of, there was a culture around it, and it was how you found bands to listen to. But for me, I did not have that again, so I had to rely on my friends. Also another big thing was downloading music. Downloading music fucking sucked in the 2000s. It was so bad. It was so slow. I didn't even have internet. I had to rely on like the kindness of my friends to spend hours downloading 30 songs for me to listen to, or they would lend me their because I would listen to music on my PSP. So what I would do is that I would have them lend me their memory sticks, and I would plug that into my PS3, or I would have them put it on a USB and I would plug that into my PS3 and I would just take it out, and that's how I got music. And sometimes I would even pay classmates to be like, hey dude, can you get me this? I would hand them a list of like songs I wanted, and they'd be like, yeah, I could get that for you. And I would give them like $5 or whatever. I would give them $1, you know, because that actually was a lot of money back then. If you're just buying stuff at like the snack bar, or like someone was selling candies for $1. So yeah, It was what I think about being an emo in the 2000s. I think of the inconvenience, and like we didn't have cars either. Not until I got to high school. I had one friend with a car, and then I had another friend get a car. Everything was just so, I don't know. Everything was like, there was a sense of freedom culturally, but we did not realize how inconvenient things were. As an adult, yeah, it's cool now because everyone has their own car. Everyone drives everywhere. There's 50 different flavors of Monster. You can watch whatever you want. But back then, you could not do all that shit. The coolest things were, though, is that in high school, emo was still going on, but it was kind of, I don't know, it started transforming, which I will get into. But Adventure Time and Regular Show were coming out, and those two are very emo coded, alternative coded, which is awesome because I saw that shit as it was coming out, and that was great. to be in high school and like seeing that as it's coming out, and then not realizing what a big like cultural phenomenon it would remain. Like Adventure Time is still relevant today because it's just such a well-made cartoon, and it's so creative, and it speaks to artists, and it speaks to alternative people, and even normal people like it, you know? So that's a really cool aspect of being emo in the 2000s. Also, like doing like smoking weed, dude. It was crazy because it's just weed. Like today, it's like, oh, whatever. Yeah, whatever, smoking weed. The worst thing that can happen is that you get drug tested and you fail your drug test and you get fired. But like, no one really cares. No one really cares about that. Back then, though, weed was fucking villainized bad. Like if you were doing that and your parents found out, it was like them finding out you were doing heroin because no one had an idea of what it was. It was villainized. They were giving presentations on how it would ruin your life, and you would go to jail for 1 million years, and it would destroy your lungs. You would get the black lung like a miner in West Virginia. And so what made weed good back then, because the weed now is very much higher quality, what made weed good back then was the crime. the fact that you're not supposed to be doing it, the fact that you're sneaking around when your friends' parents go to sleep, you're going to the backyard in the dark and just kind of like trying to hit a bowl. Like you don't have that anymore because everyone just has a pen. There's no ritual. There's no like, you gotta pack the pipe and you gotta like light the fire, and there's a lot of smoke and then you're gonna stink when you go inside. All of that's just gone. And that's one thing I miss about being an emo teenager, even though it doesn't really have to do with being emo. But emo aesthetics, not to go on too long. This video is like an hour and a half already, but I don't give a shit. I'm going to keep talking about this. The weird thing about emo aesthetics is that this is something that no one wants to acknowledge, but towards 2009, like 2010, 2011, I guess like the turn of the decade, weirdly enough, if you remember like swag culture, emo culture and swag culture kind of started borrowing shit from each other. like why were scene kids wearing snapbacks? Why were swag kids wearing skinny jeans? And no one still to this day is like, hey, that was kind of weird that we were like, we basically had the same silhouette fashion wise. But I just think that's really funny that the barriers were coming down, the walls were coming down thanks to the internet. This was the first time we saw the monoculture was dying, but people still had their identities, people still had their like subcultures. But when you look back, you could see things where the barriers were starting to be more permeable. And yeah, I think that's all I want to say. The only thing I forgot to say is like, when it comes to soft countryana, it's really funny that kids or like younger people in the 80s were kind of looking back to the like I don't know, like the times gone by, like their grandparents' era, and thinking like, wow, I want to dress like that. I want to bring back that like authenticity. And then we did that shit again in the 2000s. Like that's what normies did. And right now everyone just calls the style of the time, the 2010s, early 2010s, late 2000s style as the hipster style. But hipsterism back then, if you lived back then, that was not what hipster was. Hipster was a pejorative term for a person who was basically a gatekeeper and was a snob. But then weirdly, that, I guess, ideal, that aesthetic just kind of peaked in 2010. And if you're older and you're probably like, no, it's been around. I'm from Portland. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it hit the mainstream. Everyone was talking about folk music. Everyone was talking about Mumford and Sons. They were talking about home. Let me go home. Home is wherever I'm with you. Like that kind of shit. And that is literally soft countryana making a comeback. That is, in the 80s, it was like, oh my God, corporations are taking over everything. We need to, you know, we feel culturally lost. We need to touch our our roots, you know. And we were doing that again. We're in 2010. We were like, oh shit, the internet's taking over everything. Like, we need to be more organic. We need to be more authentic. We need to look like we lived in the Dust Bowl era. And the funny thing is, like, underlying all these things, underlying everything, is what I said at the beginning of the video. All of this is corporate inception of fashion, of ideas. There's some kind of corporate Bene Gesserit faction who is implanting these thoughts into people and associating certain looks with it. And I don't know who fucking did that. I don't know if it's the magazines. I don't know if it's the fashion houses. I don't know if it's boardrooms. It's probably a combination of all of those. But the funny thing is now, like, we don't really have that. Everything now is kind of like a style buffet. You can fucking pick and choose what you want. And so I'm gonna have to start closing it here because I've been talking for almost 2 hours. So I'm just gonna do the outro now, and I'm gonna go back to the idea of nostalgia. Nostalgia is a funny thing because it's not real. It's not fucking real. It's an idea in your head of how the past felt. Even though when you were there, you weren't thinking that. You weren't thinking, oh, I'm going to miss the look of this thing. You know, I'm going to miss indie sleeves. I'm going to miss the hipster fashion. You know, I'm going to miss girls wearing those net little caps on their heads and having the weird wide brimmed hats. And it was that's just background stuff. Like, no one was fucking looking at that. No one cared. No one was trying to be hipster. That's just how people looked. And so sometimes I do get not depressed, but I will look back and I'll have like a little bit of a yearning for a certain time. And I was always just thinking, like, why is that? And I truly think it's because the past is just ordered. It's just everything has been narrowed down. Everything has been sifted out. Whatever was bad, we forget about. Whatever was memorable, we remember. If something was very bad, it's notable, but we don't feel the pain of it anymore. We just look back and we see the categorized thing. We see what got cataloged. We don't see the full spectrum of what it was. And so I had this realization because one of the things I like to do, and it's going to sound weird. I think I've mentioned it, but this is going to sound weird. What I like to do is go into Google Street View and go to like different states and go to find like a suburban neighborhood and just quote drive around in it using Google Street View and just take in the vibe of a neighborhood. And I don't know, I do that because there is a sense of nostalgia to it, but there's also this sense of this is a snapshot in time. This is like a photo that you can travel through. It's a form of time travel. And so one of the things I did was I got into Google Street View, and instead of going all the way out to some state or going to Canada's like Pacific Northwest and driving through their suburbs, I was like, hey, what if I just turn the time back and go back to the earliest I can for Google Street View and look around my neighborhood and my city? So I did that, and it was kind of shocking because like I remembered all this shit that I was looking at, and it was very strange. And this was my middle school time, and I was like, whoa, I remember all this. I remember when that subdivision was just a open field. I remember when this store was here, but now it's closed. I remember when everything had this font. I remember when the gas prices were super high. Well, it was just weird. And it was like, oh, there's a Walmart there now. Or the plants in my neighborhood were so short and like tiny because our neighborhood was still young. And now like I look outside and all the trees are big and the grass is tall and the neighborhood is filled. It's not just a few houses anymore. And I just, at the same time, I was also like, yeah, I'm remembering all this, but this does not capture the feelings. It doesn't capture what I remember. This is just like, I don't know. It's very, like, I don't think anything can capture feelings. You know, I think even looking back at my yearbooks from my youth, that's just a snapshot of a time. Like I look at my classmates and I'm just like, whoa, those are little kids. But at the time there was so much depth, and like I'm looking at the face of this stupid kid and I'm just like, these kids don't know anything. But at the time they were like fully formed people with like inside jokes, and like we were having fun and we knew everything, and we felt smarter than people were giving us credit for. And so I think of this quote from the movie Lost Highway that I saw not too long ago, and I like this quote just stays in my head. It just drives me insane. And there's this part where the main characters have someone break into their house and they call the cops, and the cops come and they're like, don't you have a camcorder or something? And the main character's like, no, I don't like cameras. Or he says something like that. He's like, I don't like cameras. I don't have any. And the officer asks him, why don't you like them? And he's like, because I want to remember things the way I remember them, not how they were. And so I think that's really describing the feeling I'm getting at. I don't remember things how they were. I remember things how I remember them. And it's kind of like editing a film that's going on. Like you're cutting clips and you're emphasizing, you're making edits, you're making scenes more dramatic than they were. You're making highlight reels of what happened that year, and a lot of stuff gets left on the cutting room floor, and a lot of stuff gets distorted to be not what it was, but how it impacted your feelings. And that's something that only lives in your head. That's not something that can be documented. You could even write a diary, and even then you're editing. You're not writing down everything that happened that day. You're not taking a 4K video of everything that happened that day. You're editing time, and you're making a version of the time you passed through for yourself that only you can access. And yeah, I think it's important to have some level of going back and having nostalgia and stuff like that. I don't think it's weird anymore. I thought it was unhealthy, but I think now it's kind of a way to access those little edits in your mind, and it can be healthy to reconnect with certain things that you've lost. Yeah. So if you ever want to try something cool, drive around in Google Street View. I kind of do it as a calming ritual, kind of like how some people watch ASMR, but maybe it won't work the same way for you. I think everyone has a different like calming ritual to lower their cortisol and shit. So that's pretty much all my thoughts that I wanted to talk about. And yeah, if you made it this far, congratulations. People usually tap out like 1/20th into a long video like this. So if you stuck around, I'm glad I connected with you. That's all I gotta say. Thank you for watching. Have a good rest of your day.